Well, hello, everybody. This is Tim Green with the Rattle Magazine. Welcome to Rattlecast number 257. Today's guest is Siddharth Dasgupta. He'll be here in about 5 minutes, but before we begin, I should say that Rattle is a publication of the Rattle Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit working to promote the practice of poetry. We've been a continuous publication since 1995 and are unaffiliated with any other organization. We just do all this because we love poetry, and I know you do too, so please do click on the like button and share. Make sure you're subscribed, ring the bell for notifications, leave us some reviews on iTunes or Spotify or anywhere else you're hearing this if you're listening after the fact. And today is an early show, so glad for the people who could roll out of bed in time. I just rolled out of bed myself. It is an opportunity, though, for anybody who wants to share poems on the prompt lines later. If it's usually too late in the day, when we do them at on the East Coast, it might be like 10 or 11 at night. If you'd like to do it earlier, today is your opportunity, and you can share any prompt poems later in the second half from any previous prompts too. It doesn't have to be this week's, so keep that in mind. So if you're sitting here listening to this, and you've always wanted to, but then you fall asleep, this is a good week for you. Now, as always, we're going to start out though with our our Poets Respond poet. And Rex Wilder is here. Rex the poet I've been admiring for a long time. Finally got him in an issue with his Poet Respond poem. Here he is, Rex Wilder. Hey, Rex, how you doing?
Hey, nice to see you.
Yeah. So glad to have you in an issue. You had a bunch of poems that came close, and then we finally got you one in here, and really looking forward to that. And looking forward to having you. We were talking about having you as a guest later, too. I think we'll do that when your next book comes out. So tell us about this poem, though, and how it came to be.
Well, what's difficult when I'm one of those people who just sits down and writes. And I think what happened is I was just taken with what happened, was it a week ago now when we had the prisoner swap between Russia and the United States? And I found the whole situation highly unusual, given that we were sending back assassins, we were sending back murderers, and we were getting writers in return. Of course, writers are very valuable. But I found the whole thing, it just got me to thinking, and I basically sat down and wrote the poem. I was feeling very alone at the time, which you can see at the end of the poem, and it started to come out. And I was just feeling the concept of separation and this idea of, I don't know how it came to me, but faces against a window, this whole idea of not being able to touch, not being able to make communication. And so it all just came together in whatever it is, 9 lines. And my best poetry friend always tells me, don't describe your poems because then they'll start to shrink on me. So I think what I love is just putting down what comes to me and maybe moving around the lines. And what happened is what you see here, but it was it's astounding how you can respond to what the zeitgeist is, what happens. Like all of your wonderful Poets Respond poems are like that, where something happens and if you don't write directly about it, it informs whatever your emotion is. I think, is it John Gardner? John Gardner, the guy who wrote Grendel, he used to have this great prompt where he would say, I want you to write about the side of a barn. Now, I want you to write about the side of a barn if one of your family has just died. And I always found that fascinating. So you're not writing about the death, you're writing about the side of the barn. So I guess that's how I was feeling here.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. Let's hear the poem, then we'll talk a little bit more about it. So why don't you go ahead and read it?
Okay. Hard labor. A chrysanthemum petal makes me think of a swapped prisoner. What was given up for this beauty pressing against the marble countertop like a face? My country regularly brings an innocent home in return for cold blood, an art teacher for an assassin. A bottle of sky blue Windex stands by the photo frame by the bananas like a guard. Prisoners clean their own cells, I'm told. To wit, I feel your soft hand on mine as I shine the glass at all hours, removing the smudge of our separated lives.
And that was Hard Labor by Rex Wilder. And what I loved, speaking of the prompts, as we were talking about a little earlier, one of the prompts just a couple weeks ago was to make a poem that has a bunch of leaps in it. And that's just such an important aspect of poetry, to make things come to life by going to surprising places. And what's cool about that is the way you let yourself leap through so many sort of thoughts in such a short period of time. And how, so was it like letting your mind wander and putting it down where your mind wanders that lets you go there? Is that the writing process?
I think so. I think so. I think this particular poem, because it was written quickly, I'd write one sentence and that would lead to the next. And I once thought that the best poems that I've read are the ones like, is it the James Wright poem that has that great last line about is it sitting on the hammock? I don't remember what that was.
Lying in the hammock, yeah, and
Right,
Duffy's
right,
farm.
right. And I feel that those leaps, it's almost what's between the lines that takes your breath away when you got them right. And I think that's how this poem was written. And it also the last two lines became very haunting and very heartbreaking to me. And I didn't know that the poem was going there.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, well, very cool. Thanks so much for sharing that, Rex. Thanks for joining us early this morning out here in the Pacific time zone.
thank you.
Yep, take care. And then we mentioned you do have a book coming out in November, so hopefully we'll have you on as a guest then.
That sounds great. I look forward to it.
All right, cool. Take care. Yeah, that was Rex Wilder with today's Poets Respond poem. Once again, that was Hard Labor. And now we're going to take a quick break and go to our main guest, Siddharth Dasgupta. So sit tight, and I'll be right back with more poetry. And we're back. Like I said, today's guest is Siddharth Dasgupta. Siddharth writes poetry and fiction from lost hometowns. His fourth book, Moveable East, was published in 2021. A fifth book, his third collection of poetry, All These Streets We've Known by Heart, was published in 2022. He's also the author of a novel and a book short stories as well. He's read in cities like Bombay, Lucknow, Mandalay, Paris, Istanbul, and Dubai. He serves as editor visual narratives with the Bombay Literary Magazine, but calls the city of Poona home, and he joins us from there, which is why we're having the earlier show today. Hey, Siddharth, how you doing?
Hey, Tim. I'm doing really well. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you and everyone who sort of managed to wake up this early and all around the world. I'm really glad you could join us.
Yeah, well, like I was saying earlier, it's nice to have shows at different times. We have the usual time, but there are people that listen all over the world. Like literally, like every time zone maybe has somebody, and so sometimes it's terrible times at the normal time. So this is a chance to participate live for people who don't usually get to. So we're happy to do it occasionally, and glad we could accommodate the time zone in India where it's 8:30 p.m. right now.
Yeah, that's right.
So do you want to start out with a poem?
Yeah, I'm going to start off with a poem called Blue Rag. And just a short thing about the title. Rag is an Indian classical music structure, which each rag is dependent or sort of characteristic of a certain mood. And I just felt it was nice to sort of associate that with a color. Here's Blue Rag. Sooner or later, everything abides. All of monsoon fills into a single boat-shaped banyan leaf, some thousands of years old. At night, the moon is an ampersand, and the city wonders why. Malika insists she still has a youth, in a song that sounds as though it is escaped from another star. The light years that separate me from you, the ocean that divides truth from rewritten histories. Time swallows age, but apparently even distance. The blue light from the television screen insists that all static is found poetry. I found tenderness in half-lit rooms and unmade hotel beds, in half-lit poems and unmade urban regrets, enough to want to offer beauty as a remembered prayer. It's nearing first light across the organza of this elsewhere sky. At dawn, the song is an ampersand, and the city wonders why.
Yeah, beautiful ending, especially in that poem, and great movement through all the images. It's a great example of what your work does, I think, using the cities and places as a character, really, and bringing settings to life. Is sort of what you specialize in. Can you walk us through your history, your personal history, and with poetry too? But I know, or I understand, you've moved all over. You've lived in a lot of different places. So what was that like, and how did that move you into poetry? What was your beginnings with that?
Yeah, I feel I've been a nomad for most of my life. Lived in quite a few places, traveled a fair bit. I've been back home in India now for a while, but even in India, you feel fairly nomadic because it's such a large, vast sort of continent unto itself. And literature and books have always been an enduring passion. But I think this sort of real sort of concerted, passionate move towards poetry, I think was in my early 20s, through people like Tagore, through some of the older beat poets, through Neruda and stuff like that. And it was a bit of an introduction through which I could start, sort of exploring things.
Mm-hmm. And what was it, that led you to certain places? I know I read that you lived in Istanbul, for example. I don't know the whole list of places, but there are a lot of places you've been. And what was it that drew you around the world so much?
I've lived in the Middle East for a fair amount of time,
Mm-hmm.
and I lived in Namibia for about a year. It's just the way life has turned out. I sort of dropped out of college. I decided really soon that I wanted to see the world and I wanted to work my way through the world. So yeah, I've been fortunate to land up in a few places, interesting cities.
So do you think that what drew you to find different places and to live different places is the same thing that draws you to write poems about them? It's
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's like it's a search for both the familiar as well as the absolutely unknown. It's a search for an ethnic heartbeat. It's a search for whatever constitutes home at that given point in time. So, and for me, the city has turned out to be a recurring motive in my writing. So, absolutely, I agree with you entirely.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's hear the next poem. What is you want
Sure.
to share next?
It's called Prayers for the Dreamer. From the seasoned fangs of an ash-blue metropolis, every nebula is a faint mythical hum, like the exhalations of a forest, the chimera of a lover, or the pages of a poet. This is the only tenderness our urban epics know, the sky, and beneath it humans falling. A jubilant herd of shooting stars reaches for the hollow in the quietness. Nocturnal eye reaches for the warmth of skin, but could just as easily do with drugs instead. This is the cunning of age, of spelling desire in a few different ways. The tobacco shop around the corner sells a few magazines from 1988. I wonder about the amnesia of time, how any year is nothing more than what remains remembered. In this city, the sirens are dying down, and we're beginning to dream again. In this city, love is seasonal, much like the pangs of hapless calves, the migration of northern mulberries, a night of beautiful radio, songs plucking at the lure of my glorified skin. Lover eye reaches for the wombs that have taken the shape of words, given how every city is what remains after the forgetting.
Yeah, and so that is Prayers for the Dream Hour, again from Siddharth Dasgupta. And so of all the places you've been, are certain places, do they feel more poetic to you than other places? And I think, because it feels like when I go around, anytime I go anywhere, there's certain aspects that make a thing seem poetic. I think like there's a place with a lot of character, a lot of history, a lot of things that inspire your imagination maybe feel poetic. So I don't know, is there something, is there a place that feel more poetic to you than less, or is the whole world a poetry machine?
I've been intensely sort of drawn towards the Iranian city of Isfahan. It's a city of poetry. It's an ancient city. There's a lot of kind of symbolic similarity with India, and yet, it's the foreignness of it. So if I were forced to pick one, it would probably be Isfahan. But living in India over the past decade again, and returning to India, I found that so much of India is so poetic.
Mm-hmm.
Bombay, my hometown, Poona, Galle, an old city, an ancient city. Any city, I think, with the age and character, sort of deals in poetry, I feel.
Mm-hmm. And so when you're trying, to capture that, people are on the chat are already pointing out that line, "What remains after the forgetting," which is Nivadita pointed that out as a line you love, and that is it's a wonderful line. And is there a way that sort of stands in for what you're doing? What remains after you've been through a place is sort of the heart of poetry. Maybe is that what are you trying to do what are you trying to capture in a poem?
There's some of that, because a bit of poetry to me seems like an archival project, that you're archiving cities, you're archiving memories, you're archiving humans, you're archiving encounters. So it's a bit of an archival project, and yet at times it's the act of letting go. Poetry at times, or a specific poem, can be saying goodbye to a certain city or a certain human. So I think it's a nice clash between the two, which I think that's what I find most interesting about poetry, actually. The fact that you can archive and you can hold on, but you can also let go.
Mm-hmm. Just a question that come in from Nikita Park, who was a guest on the Rattlecast before, an Indian poet who lived in, I believe, Scotland for a while, too. She mentioned Stirling. She says, do you have any poems on Stirling? And has Scotland informed your writing in any way?
Well, I had a remarkable 5 days in Inverness, which is up in Highlands. Friends of mine were getting married in a dilapidated old castle, and I have some really strong memories of that time. There is some poetry. It's kind of scattered, and it's about Glasgow and Edinburgh, and then on to the Highlands. But it's an astonishingly beautiful part of the world. I know Nikita; she's a wonderful poet.
Yeah. She says, I find myself writing more and more about Stirling and just the beauty of Scotland's particular brand of magic. I like that phrase too, a brand of magic, because that's maybe what places have. They all have their own brand, their own flavor of magic. Totally. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And honestly, there's no city without at least a trace of magic. It's sometimes we get lazy and we don't look hard enough, but every city has something which sort of sparks.
Yeah, I love that idea that sometimes we're lazy and don't look hard enough, because that's kind of the way of life. I mean, no matter where you are, a pastoral farm field with very little in it can have, if you look close enough, the entire, like the battles of the ants going on there. I mean, there's always something amazing if you have that mindset of looking for amazement.
And of course, we're laziest with our hometowns. Sometimes we just sort of bypass our hometowns, but there's so much magic to be had. If you just dive in.
Yeah, that's really interesting that you say that, because you travel a lot and then you came back to Poona. So was it like coming back with fresh eyes and a new sense of wonder for the things you'd taken for granted for when you returned?
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. And it was a sort of reintroduction to Poona, and it was kind of falling in love with Poona all over again.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's hear another poem.
Yeah, let's. This is called "Forgetting Is Our uh, Love Language," and it's a Poona poem, as it turns out. Uh, Poona silhouettes. The rouge remains of yesterday's dusk, dances into today's dawn. A clutch of clubgoers spills out into the compassionate street. The air still, wild. The newspaper wala unspools the country's collective silence. A handful of rickshawalas gathers around a banyan, lazy as fuck already. I think of you, if only for a brief second, while crossing St. Mary's Church and the tiny bungalow that brews bottles of raspberry red ardeshers. A city can be both catalyst for hope and keeper of secrets. I trust you found your way in the world, away from ghosts, from this tapestry of silhouettes. Romance is the secret recipe of the world's great cities. I carry some in my pocket, some in my journal, a few drops on the bridge of my sun-pecked neck. In these parts, forgetting is our love language, and damn if I'm not getting increasingly better at it.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, perfect for that what we were talking about just now. Forgetting is our love
Yeah.
language by Siddharth Dasgupta. Um, so given that the setting is so much the character in your poems, do you
Yeah.
feel how much of yourself is a character? I think sometimes, especially in American poetry, we get sort of bogged down with the lyric I a little too much, and we're sort of focused on ourselves and not doing as much of the journalistic kind of or distance or like overhead type of poetry. Do you feel that having focusing on the external allows you to enter into different ideas and concepts? Is that one of the reasons you do it?
Just, my relationship with poetry, I've always been drawn to the poets and the poems uh, that sort of gazed out at the world,
Hmm.
and they weren't only concerned with their lives and uh, their sort of catastrophes and their private sort of wars that they were waging. The fact that you carry yourself and it's you and it's your personality and it's your history. But if you can take that and if you can look out at the world, that is the kind of poetry that I've always been most interested in as a reader. And it's the way my writing has developed quite naturally, I think, quite organically.
Hmm. Yeah. One of the things I think I forgot to mention this in the opening introducing you, but you're do a lot on Instagram too. It's citizen.bliss on Instagram is
Yeah.
your Instagram, including a lot of visual things, a lot of photography, and you're the editor of visual narratives with the Bombay Literary Magazine. And so what does that mean? First of all, the editor of visual narratives. What is it that you publish there?
Primarily photographic essays,
Hmm.
uh, photo essays from all over the world. But also, someone wants to send in a city poem or an urban video poem. That's also part of uh, s- uh, that also forms part of visual narratives. So it's anything that's visual is telling a story. It could be in the form of an essay, it could be in the form of a video, it could be in the form of a series of photo vignettes. All of that's up for the taking.
Yeah. So I was wondering if, given publishing photography series, is that something that informs the way that you write poems? Do you think of it as a series of images that you're creating through words, but the images are sort of what guide the poems for you?
At times, the image is so powerful and so potent. If you're talking about a human or if you're talking about a city, sometimes the visual is so overpowering that it leads you towards the poem. But often, of course, it's a poem that sort of paints a picture.
Hmm.
And I think the two tend to dance with each other. I come from a background in branding and design and advertising and all of that. So that's been an early part of my life and it sort of stayed with me. Uh, it's and I never thought it would have any bearing on my writing, but it has. And even in the very practical, magical way that I end up designing most of my books, and their covers and their social media presence and all of that.
Hmm. Yeah. So if you're looking for, like, what are you looking for in a photo series? And I
Yeah.
think there seems to me that there's a lot we could learn as writers. You know, I mean, they say a picture's worth 1,000 words, and yet we want to make words anyway instead of just pictures. So, uh, what is it that you're looking for in a photo series, and how, what can poets learn from that? Because it feels like there's a lot we could learn.
I'm looking for anything that tells a truthful story. It could be your truthful story. It could be uh, people have sent in sort of city narratives, which is, like a photo guided sort of series of recollections of their city or the city they're in. And anything that can speak the truth, where the photography is sort of telling the story without much explanation, without any captions, but there's a larger narrative being formed, and each story is leading towards the other. How this leads, how this has any bearing on poetry, I think the forming of these larger continents, which sometimes, again, I think it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. Sometimes we tend to be too insular, and sometimes we tend to be too unto ourselves, whereas we're always part of something greater. And I think that's what the visual narrative or the photographic essay sort of tells you about.
Yeah. Well, Nivedita Karthik is asking about she says, is ekphrastic poetry better than just having words to tell a story? Do you do ekphrastic writing? Do you write on, photography, yours or others, or is it more you're capturing what you've seen?
It's usually it's what I've seen and experienced and
Hmm.
felt, and so it's usually much of that. But I follow your ekphrastic series regularly, and
Hmm.
it's lovely. It's terrific. Yeah.
So do you ever do you have any thoughts about that, about combining the two? As
Mm.
Nivi says, is it better? Let's do something more than just tell the story of the photo. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, exactly, because you're actually going into the subtext. You're not going into the photograph itself, especially with the ekphrastic poem. You're sort of you're filling in the gaps that the photographer has left. You're trying to paint the atmosphere and the setting and the mood and the humans that inhabited the photo. And often you're dreaming up lives because you have no idea who the actual person or the actual setting is. So your
Hmm.
dream, it's imagination, it's truth, it's fact, it's fiction, and I think it's a when done properly, when done well, it's a pretty sublime merging of everything, of all these things.
Yeah. Well, I should say, if anybody has any questions for Siddharth, please feel free to leave them in the chat windows on Facebook or YouTube. I'll keep an eye on both of those. It helps, like Monica Dobos just did, if you put question in all caps so I can see it. But first, let's hear some other poems. What is up next? We have The Other Words in Waves.
Yeah, I think the previous poem was a Poona poem, and then it's quite natural that I shift to a Bombay poem. The two cities are kind of tied,
Hmm.
tied at the hip, the sister cities. And other words, within the tropical blush of a Bombay afternoon, the confessions of a fabled Hindi film studio serving as an address. The Egyptian writer Adav Suef says, "The Nile is the longest river. It is also the loneliest river." I'm struck by how you could replace Nile with a clutch of other carefully chosen words, and the sentence would keep its form just the same. Marriage, monsoon, grief, love, drought, harvest, kiss, age, beauty, hell, even life. The Nile is the longest river. It is also the loneliest river. The words dance among the homes and the churches that litter this leafy neighborhood, into lives creaking beneath the weight of their own lengths, beneath shadows fumbling into the folds of their private solitudes. Crickets confess love for each other. A 10-minute walk removed, waves do much the same, sending brine-soaked letters drenched with Arabic laments crashing into the paths of rocks and faith. The Nile is the longest river. It is also the loneliest river. Another word comes to mind, capable of replacing Nile with no conception, with no concession to the legitimacy of the sentence. That word is writer.
Yeah, and that was and other words in waves, and I love the concept behind that poem. That replacing the Nile in that phrase with so many other words, with a kiss, with a harvest, with love, with grief, and it really does work. And it's a great time to ask about your writing process, I think. So for a poem like that, but also in general, how you approach the blank page. How do you come up from it? It feels like that was the impetus probably of that poem. So how did the poem come to be from that first initial thought?
Uh, uh, Strangely, or perhaps clearly enough, the wonderful Egyptian writer Adaf Suez was in Bombay. It was a literary festival we were part of, and she had a session, and I rushed from my session to hers. And she had a she had an essay about she had written about the Nile, and she started off with that sentence, and I was immediately struck by it, by how sort of lonely and powerful and desolate and yet uh, universal that sentence was. And immediately these words started to flow. So luckily I had a diary with me. And as the session was going on, I was writing. So this had a very, very clear sort of starting point. Often there's different sort of catalysts, for a poem to emerge. Sometimes it's just pure lyricism. You're struck by the dancing of a few words. Sometimes there's a few words that come together and you just feel they belong, like you feel like the home. And at times there's something you want to write about, so you let it linger for a while, and then you sort of it sort of forms its structure. So different catalysts, and I think over time, writing enough, you get to identify which belongs to which poem,
Mm-hmm.
what struck, but it takes a bit of time. It doesn't happen immediately. Yeah.
Yeah. So I noticed that this poem is a prose poem or almost a prose poem, and previous
Yeah.
ones had very specific line breaks.
Yeah.
Is the structure of that something that do you play with it after the fact? Is it sort of is it actually like a journal? You mentioned journal a few times. Is it writing in a journal and then taking those words and shaping them into a poem? How do you
Sometimes,
how is that on a very technical level?
yeah,
Like how do you go from
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. At times, what's appeared on the journal is exactly how I want the poem to be, and so I retain that, on the page as well. Uh, at times, the great joy of poetry is the act of line breaks. It's because sometimes new meaning is found. Sometimes by deleting, a line or a word or a sentence, something magical opens up. And so that is a drafting or an editing process, which is hugely rewarding because it sheds your own poem in new light, and then you're constantly surprised.
Hmm.
You're sort of chipping away. You're finding new truths.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good way to put it. Rose Leonard asks, I assume it's Leonard asks, I get the impression Siddharth is a very prolific writer, constantly playing with words and ideas. Is that true? Are you sort of always tinkering with poems, and do you always have that journal open, or is it writing come in
Uh,
phases?
did she mention the word prolific?
She did, yeah.
Okay, okay. I think that's fair to say. I mean, I'm always writing at some point or the other. And I think fiction takes a lot of preparation. Fiction, you need to sort of stock up on your protein intake and all of that, just to sort of get through it. But poetry for me is like a daily prayer. It's a daily, I might discard it entirely. It might mean nothing. But just the fact that I've written a word or a stanza, and I've been able to join a few stanzas, or at times an entire poem has emerged. So poetry ends up becoming a daily prayer, and it's been a fairly organic, natural practice over the past 7, 8 years, I'd say.
Hmm. Monica Dobos, her question was about the fact that you're a fiction writer too, and she asked, which I wanted to talk about as well. She asked, which ventricle of your heart does poetry occupy? What pushes you toward poetry versus fiction? It's a good question.
Yeah. Uh, I think I'm deeply passionate about writing, just writing,
Hmm.
and so in that sense, fiction and poetry sort of occupy proportionate continents for me. But when they say a parent has two children, and uh, they would love one more than the other, even if they say they love both of them equally. And I think poetry is the abiding passion. There's an Indian word. It's an Urdu word called junoon, and I don't know if there's an equivalent in English. It's plainly put as passion, but it's also obsession. It's also madness. It's also a sort of Sufi splendor. And to me, that is poetry. You know, uh, it's devotion, it's prayer, it's faith, it's redemption, it's all of that.
So what is does the writing process change a lot between the two genres? Do you handle fiction a lot differently, or does it still come out of the journals in the same way?
I try. I mean, I fail often, but I try more disciplined with fiction because you can't really let a lot of time slip by between chapters because then you've lost something.
Hmm.
Uh, with poetry, I'm more wavered. I'm more. There's more wilderness. There's more wildness. I'm far more wild in poetry than I am in fiction because poetry allows for that.
Hmm.
So might as well celebrate that, right?
Yeah, that's a great way to put that. Well, I should say, if anybody hasn't yet, please do click the like button. There's always this time there's 3 times as many people watching live as have clicked like so far. Always helps if you click like. That feeds it to more people live, which is fun too. But let's
Yeah,
hear the next poem, Siddharth.
sure. Uh, it's called Trying Slowly to Disremember the City. Sorry. Yeah. Some years bring mountains. This is such a year. Himachali children with rouged cheeks run across wildflowered meadows, past homes their ancestors carved from wind, sky, and the tales of nightly spirits. These mountains were a river once, the river a sea, and the sea a fused jukebox of wails from African throats, sung in the dialect of a Sanskrit Swahili duet, each song speaking of a vast floating metacontinent where tigers and leopards frolicked in the tribal skin of past earths. This must mean that I too am part human, part folklore, like the coarse husk of jungles, like a gazelle left too long in the wind. Some years bring mountains. I begin to climb, knowing fully well that I'm only ascending a road back to myself.
Yeah, beautiful poems there, and so many lush lines. Your poetry is full of really great, surprising details, like in the sea of fused jukebox of whales from African throats. There's so much
Thank
detail
you.
like that in your work, which is one of the reasons I love it. And we did a tribute to Indian poets several years ago, and I always love doing those, just focusing on poetry from different regions and seeing what submissions we get. Like we'll get 1,000 or more submissions, and then looking through and picking the best poems, but also seeing a flavor of the style of writing. And one of the things I noticed doing that issue is there's a more of a tendency toward generality than specificity among Indian
Yeah.
poets, I would say. And you turn that on its ear and go in completely opposite directions, sort of like the most, concrete and muscular kind of poetry you could have, I think. So why do you think that is? I've always been interested in that question. To me, my total hypothesis that's probably completely ignorant is I feel like there's so many beautiful languages in India that the music of the poem ends up having a more of a forefront of the poetry in general, than maybe in English as a language is not as musical as other languages are, really, and so we sort of focus more on image and detail, and maybe that's a difference. But I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
I think that's certainly part of it. A sense of musicality has always been integral and integral and sometimes often crucial to Indian poetry.
Hmm.
That these are you painting a vivid portrait, that musicality that sort of paints a picture and paints a story and paints a sort of narrative. Um, but also, I think there's a lot of sublime Indian poetry that is deeply specific. If you were to look at the likes of Tishani Doshi and Ranjit Hoskote and Pervin Saket, and also if you go back to the times of Tagore and sort of Mascarenas and Dom Moraes, they were poets who were Indian but sort of found themselves out in the world, and thus ended up painting these sort of very, very specifically Indian portraits and poems, but stuff that was also merged the musicality with a sense of specificity.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's a combination at play.
Yeah. Well, that definitely makes sense. Let's hear another poem. Next we have Thus Far.
Yeah, thus far. Gather all the footprints you've left thus far on earth, be it in cafes, in cities, on bridges, farther continents, across the tidal dance of a fable, beneath the felling gaze of a lover, or within the duplicitous denials of dirt. Gather them in a bag of jute, tied with a string of reed, and release them into the ravening sea. Gather all the footprints you've left thus far on earth. They won't fall as dust or be whisked away like mist. They'll swirl at first, then tread the contours of a letter before framing their sorrows and their memories and their triumphs and their longitudes through the creation of a solitary word, Gati, the Buddhist name for destiny.
Yeah, another beautiful poem that was Thus Far by Siddharth Dasgupta. One of the things I'm always curious about too is just the way poetry is treated in other places around the world. You know, in the United States, it's sort of this niche culture that not many people care at all about. Most of the things people encounter is poetry is sort of greeting card type verse that's on like Instagram and things like that. And there's it's this sort of, if you talk to somebody next to you on the plane and they say, "What do you do?" I have this thing. I'm trying not to do it, but I have this thing where I say, they say, "What do you do?" I'm like, "Oh, I edit a magazine." And they're like, "What kind of magazine?" And I'm like, "Oh, literature." And they're like, "What kind of literature?" And I'm like, "Poetry." And then they don't know what to say, and it's kind of awkward. So I try not to get to that far, unless you hit like one of the 10% of people who likes poetry, and then they're like amazed and love it and stuff. But it's a weird ratio there. So if somebody asks you, what you do in India. And you say, "I'm a poet." How does that feel? And how does that feel in different places around the world that you've lived?
Yeah. Well, for me, the truthful enough answer is I'm a writer. And, because I sort of traverse these different continents. But I mean, it's such a wonderful thing to be a poet. And there's a very strong tradition of that in India because many of our stories stem from folk tales, and folk tales were sort of glorified melodramatic poetry in many ways, and so we're very accustomed to the idea of people being poets or dabbling in poetry, and and there's a lot of young people reading poetry, but of course any publisher will tell you that no one's reading poetry and no one's buying poetry, but that's another thing entirely. I'm quite proud and I'm quite happy to open up that conversation by saying I am a poet. And if I'm met with silence, then great. I don't think there'd be a conversation there anyway, Mm-hmm. So it's great that got cut off really quickly. Yeah.
Yeah. Nidhi says, I think poetry is big in India. Many people here have it ingrained in themselves. And there is that way. We talked to Tishani Dota, who you mentioned was on the Rattlecast. We talked to her about that, about how poetry is sort of everywhere in a way, because she's been around the world too. She spent a lot of time in the U.S. as well. Sure. And, she was talking about how starkly the contrast is, where it's sort of everywhere on the walls of temples and things in India and in cabs and streetcars and things like that, whereas it's not as much here. And Maz bin Bilal, who was on a couple of last month, I guess, was talking about the shares, the big events where poetry is read in a stadium-like setting, which is sort of foreign to us all in the U.S. So it's really interesting to hear about the different contrasts. But yet you said too that a publisher will tell you that poetry doesn't really sell. And so I wonder, that is always so baffling to me and of course I'm, poetry editor, poet, whatever. But to me, I buy books of poetry and it seems like silly to buy. I mean, no offense as a novelist, but it seems sort of, you read a novel like once or twice, maybe 20 years apart. But poetry you can pick up any time, and you can thumb through and meet with somebody, an old friend, and hear that, and there's sort of this timeless, always useful quality to a book of poetry. Whereas a novel, I should get it at the library, and then check it out 20 years later when I want to read it again if it was good enough, So why do you think poetry doesn't sell? And even in India, where it has, such more ingrained in the culture, why do you think it's harder to sell poetry than it is prose?
I wish I had a concrete answer for you, because I do know that a lot of people read poetry in this country, and there are events. Every major city and even every small city, there will be something connected to poetry, either a spoken word sort of gathering of poets, or a poetry festival or something of the sort. And there's a lot of poetry being written. Why it doesn't sell, I have no idea. Well, maybe there's been a tradition of fiction and novelists being the sort of prestige element of literature. But I'm entirely with you. I feel there's some book collections of poetry that I keep going back to, like every year, because I feel there's something I need to reacquaint myself with it. Whereas even like a really great, really great novel, I might perhaps pick up twice in a decade, if at all. So it's baffling in a sense, but also kind of, that's the way it is. That's how literature that's how literature has structured itself over the years.
Yeah, it's really interesting and strange that's the case, but it definitely is. It seems no matter where you go, and as technology marches on, it seems to be replacing poetry, at a more rapid rate than that it replaces other things. Monica Dobos want to know if you write in Hindi as well, or any other languages. Do you write, in other languages besides English, or do you write strictly in English?
I write primarily in English, but invariably, Hindi and Urdu words end up sort of infiltrating many of these poems. And I say infiltrating in a lovely sense, of course. It's wonderful when there's this familiar word of the soil that kind of finds its way in a predominantly English poem. I think it adds some wonderful texture to my poetry.
Mm-hmm. Well, you mentioned, poets you admire, Tagore, you mentioned other people as well. What do you think, if you look back at your progression as a poet, is there a certain poet, something that you learned that was influential, from another poet that you can think of?
Interestingly, I've named a lot of Indian writers, but one of the poets I've held on to for the longest time is Jack Gilbert, the American beat poet. And just again, because of the way my poetry has sort of formed itself, its close, vibrant connection to the city, it's sort of these motifs that have ended up becoming, recurring motifs: desire, longing, the city, a movement, a sense of movement. And Jack Gilbert dealt a lot with the city as well, which is the poem? Is it The Lost Hotels of Paris? What am I thinking about? Yeah, The Lost Hotels of Paris. That is sort of my archetypal poem, It's a sort of poem I would keep returning to again and again. And so if I were to look at a pivot around which some of my writing has sort of flourished, Jack Gilbert has been invaluable, and he's been precious, the writing he sort of put out. And also I think a slightly, in many ways, undiscovered poet, strangely enough. Even in America, even in North America, many people just don't know, which is I think it's a real shame.
Yeah, definitely. I've noticed that too. I mean, to me, he's one of my all-time favorite poets, and I've he's one his collected poems is like one of those ones that's right there on the shelf,
Yeah.
And it's not a poet that people talk about as much as other poets, which I never really understood. I think he's of that generation. I think he's the best poet in America for sure. And yeah, I agree. Because of the way you write too, that, real digging into the heart, but through setting an emotion. So there's like the whole poem becomes a journey within a space. And he does such a great job of that.
No, it does a wonderful job of that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's hear. We have 2 poems left. Let's do the second to last.
Sure. An urban abad dwells like a pilgrim. The weather will turn or it won't. The heart swells without prior anything at the sudden whiff of earth, persistent in its amorousness for distant rain. Postcard-like parcels of sea swim by from a cab's disinterested windows. I realize that I know Bombay like I knew her body, deeply, vigorously in places, entirely unknown in others. I've left love behind in so many cities that now I want some of it back. This is the disobedience of time, its careering need for leisure, birth, its time-lapsed breath on days of swooning pines and stop-motion cafes. A church smiles at me, and, forgive me, God, I smile back. 2 young lovers fade into the Art Decoed invitations of an old street. The casualness of a Thursday, plans and slowly filling enigmas. Moistened lips and held on to letters. A moment will be remembered or it won't. You probably know this by now, but this isn't really a poem about the weather.
Yeah, and that was Siddharth Dasgupta reading An Urban Abode Dwells Like a Pilgrim. And one of the things that people have talked about a lot in the chat window already is your the voice that you use. There's a conversational quality to it, while it's also highly poetic and beautiful. And so, what can you tell us about like developing your voice as a poet, and how you think about that, in terms of the music of speech coming out? Because there is this way, it feels very casual, and yet there's all these wonderfully poetic lines and the great music underneath the surface of that casual nature. So how do you approach voice, and how did you develop that?
I think I developed that just by performing, live at festivals, at sort of gatherings, and I decided very early on. In fact, it was a fairly natural progression that I won't have the so-called, in quotes, literary voice, where it seems very, very almost academic. That I do want to have a relationship with the audience, and I do want it to be conversational. But at the same time, I want there to be a bridge, that the sense that I am reading a work of fiction, or I am reading poetry, and that there is this continent, but yet I want to be conversing with you about it. I want to be in a conversation with you about it. And I feel that's a very strong, striking way to strike up a relationship with the audience. Otherwise, it almost seems, and I found this at readings and at festivals, that the reader is unto themselves, and the audience is sort of detached from what's going on. And I never wanted that with my reading.
Mm-hmm. Well, Hemet Malik says the angels gave him his voice. And I think there's more to it than that, but I love that comment. So one of the things that it seems to me that the voice comes from is like sense of confidence. Like there's a way that you aren't doubting yourself as you're writing that allows you to have the voice that operates like that. Did you ever have trouble building a sense of confidence as you were writing? I think that's one of the things that holds people back a lot. Like if you think just about not in poetry, but just public speaking in general, like the main thing is to not have that sense of self-consciousness that comes from not being confident. And I think having a strong voice that allows yourself to both be conversational and musical at the same time comes from that source of something that allows you to feel like what you have to say is worth saying. And I think we need that as poets. So is that something you had to build up, or is that something you always had?
That's so insightful, what you've spoken about. I think right from the onset, I felt I was at ease on the stage because I felt I was at ease with the audience. I almost felt that I shared a sort of familial relationship with the audience, and that family was poetry, and that family was literature, and that if you've gathered at, say, a reading or a literary sort of gathering, then we all belong to the same continent. And then it seemed to me that I had nothing to fear, and I had nothing to fear from the situation. And I was always quite, I wouldn't say confident, I was quite sort of firm and assured in the fact that what I was speaking or what I was reading or what I had to say was something that was meant, that I was always meant to say, and that it meant something, and that if it meant something to me, it would mean something to someone out there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that definitely makes sense. So you've written 5 books, and they all, I haven't read the prose books, but I kind of assume based on that it has a lot to do with place too. And you mentioned having moved around a lot and traveled a lot, and then come back to Poona. Do you find it? Do you ever have trouble with like a writer's block type thing? Because if you're so grounded in where you are, and then coming back to where you grew up and seeing it sort of with fresh eyes, once you had that, but now that you're not moving around anymore and having that as a generation for poetry, do you have any trouble pushing forward, or is there always things to write about?
Well, one aspect of that is I still travel a fair amount. I'm traveling quite regularly, and that's always a nice departure from who you are and where you are. The other aspect of that is India is never boring. There's always a million things to stimulate, to sort of stir you, to sort of inspire you and push you in different directions. And I don't sort of worry too much with writer's block, because I always step away from the writing when that happens. Mm-hmm. I don't try and force it. I'll always step away from it and try and sort of push myself, dive into life, mm-hmm. Conversations, friendships, love, desire, travel, wine. Wine is great, I feel, for writer's block.
Yeah. So what is what are you working on now? Is there a sense of how your work has changed over time, and is there something new you're tackling with work that's forthcoming still?
I'm writing a fair amount of poetry. It's poetry without agenda. I don't know if it'll land up in a new collection. Right now, it's just doing its own thing. And if it ends up, forming or leading towards a collection, great. Otherwise, I'm just sort of enjoying this sort of act of writing. And I've had a book that came out in 21. I've had a collection, this collection, in fact, All These Streets We've Known by Heart, which came out in 2022. And there's also this aspect of wanting these books and these collections to breathe, giving them some breathing room and giving them some breathing time and traveling with them, mm-hmm. and reading from them and all of that. So I'm writing a bit of fiction as well. I wrote a short story a month or so ago, and it's writing without agenda, It's just seeing where it leads to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, let's wrap it up with one last poem.
Let's do that. This one's called You'll Make a Believer Out of Me. This is no day for love song or even holy psalm. There's mercury in the water, which seems okay, as long as the damn thing's not in retrograde. Netflix tells me I'm in the mood for comedy. All I want to do is set the skin on fire and watch the world gasp at the unfurling of these Urdu flames. Kurat Lane Haider and John Coltrane. Baby, break me some bread and feed me some old lie. Leave behind a trail of crumbs so we know where home lies and can head elsewhere. Dreamy starlings are lost in their ancient namaz. It dawns on me that city is just a synonym for loss. Yet, there's daily miracle of things prospering. Dress yourself in love. Mimic the crawdads that shift without sentiment from marshland to anonymous hamlet. The streets are a mishmash of unrest and nostalgia. Broadcast it with clear voice and infidel heart. There really is no place like home.
Yeah, beautiful poems. And once again, that was Siddharth Dasgupta, You'll Make a Believer Out of Me. And so fun talking to you today, Siddharth, and sharing your beautiful poems. A lot to learn for poets around the world, and we really appreciate you being here.
Thanks so much, Tim. It was lovely talking with you. And thank you especially for this wonderful continent that you've created, which is called Rattle. I mean, what a beast, and the way it sort of ends up in welcoming poetry into the fold. You've done a marvelous job for poetry, so thank you for that. And thank you to everyone who's listening.
Well, yeah, thanks so much. It's definitely our pleasure. Everybody watching really enjoyed this, and there's going to be an influx of people watching in about 8 hours when they think that the usual showtime is on. But it's great to have you here, and really, really fun talking to you and getting to explore your work more.
Take care, Tim. We'll talk soon.
Yep.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.
Cheers.
Yeah, that was Siddharth Dasgupta, today's poet. You can find more, as we mentioned, on Siddharth's Instagram page. That is it's Citizen Bliss, I should say. Citizen.bliss on Instagram. So go give him a follow if you're on Instagram. That is citizen.bliss on Instagram. You can also find like a link tree and a whole bunch of other stuff. Let's see. How did I do? 1 second. Oh, anyway. So, we're going to take a quick break and go to our prompt lines. And the prompt for this week was to write a hot haiku sequence. That was Katie's prompt. Write a hot haiku sequence, whatever that means. A lot of ways you can go with that. Now, if you'd like to share your prompt, this, as I mentioned, or any other past prompt, you're free to do so. Just join us on the Zoom link. I'll paste that into the chat window on Facebook and YouTube. And that is I'm pasting it here. And email your poem to promptlines@rattle.com so we can show it on the screen. So email your poem to promptlines@rattle.com, then join us on the Zoom link. There we go. So I'm going to paste these into the chat windows. Remember, it is a 1-page max for poems, and it's sort of the spirit of 1 page. So if it's like really skinny lines, feel free to bump over a little bit. But it is a 1-page max for poems on the open line, so we have time to get to as many people as possible. And we'll be back with more poetry. Oh, and I should say, too, I forgot to say, if you aren't sharing poems, sit right where you are, because it's important. So join us on the Zoom if you want to share a poem. But if you want to just enjoy poems, the best place to watch is wherever you're watching right now. And we'll be back in just a moment with more poetry. And we're back. Thanks so much for your patience. We have our prompt poems editor, Katie Dozier, here. Hey, Katie, how you doing?
Hey, great. I love the interview, and I love the PR poem this week, too. So I'd say I'm liking this morning. My day is off to a very good start. I've done a lot more than normal so far.
Yeah, I like I like the night show. We mentioned before, but I used to love the Art Bell radio show, and I always had my dream is to have in the middle of the night, everybody's listening to poetry, and it's just gathering around in the darkness. That's part of my the romantic, aspect of the poetry show I like to think about. But in a way, poetry, it's wonderful in the morning too.
Well, if you want to add in another show, we can do 3 a.m. I'll wake up with you.
So, we should talk about too the prompt poet of the month. We picked the prompt poet, or you picked the prompt poem, but the poet has to work today. and can be here next week. So what we're going to do is wait until next week to share that poem. We'll move it up forward so we can talk to the poet. It's funny because that's what we did last week with Dick Westheimer, too.
Yeah, it is.
Mhm.
It is. But it'll be worth the wait, I think, everybody. And then they'll get to share the poem, which is always better than me reading it, I think.
Mm-hmm. So for this week, though, the prompt was to write a hot haiku sequence. And so what did you do? How did you approach it?
Well, first, I'd like to address that I didn't think about how we'd be reading these. I mean, I understand everybody's in different time zones, but by and large, on Sunday morning. So I decided, with that in mind, I started out by going in a traditionally, well, I don't know, actually, traditionally hot does not mean the way I was about to use the word hot, but in a different direction. So I actually wrote two sequences, but I like this one better. And it gave me an excuse to spend an inordinate amount of time on the Wikipedia page for lightning. So that's the real win.
Yeah, and the title is Astrophobia, which was not a word I thought I knew. And so I had to, I mean, I assumed it would be like fear of space or something. Or
fear of the Houston Astros.
Maybe fear of cheating.
No. Fear of something, yeah.
But yeah, but it was fear of lightning, which is an interesting thing too. So let's hear it.
Okay. Astrophobia. Heat lightning. Dreaming of you before we met. Ball lightning. Your pop fly hits my chest. Super Bowl. Our first kiss. Different states. Forked lightning. Red Sprite atop a cyclone. I'm sorry. Cloud to cloud, lightning, lightning. Positive lightning, you strike me with a compliment. Strobe lightning, I love you, and I love you, and I love you.
That's sweet. I love that. My favorite's the last one, that strobe lightning.
Well, that's good. I'm glad it's your favorite. The most gutchy. So.
Yeah, it's a great conceptual poem. I also love the different states one too, that forked lightning.
Thanks, that's my favorite. I hope that the pop fly reference passed the baseball credibility check.
Well, I mean, I think pop fly. It's possible. No. It could.
We've got some work. Every poem's a work in progress. I actually saw too. I was looking at buying a haiku book today, and one that came up on Amazon was a book of baseball haiku. Like literally, there's a book which made me happy.
Oh, that's fun. Yeah. Well, a pop fly could, if you're laying down or something, you could dive.
That's how I was picturing it. Like I'm laying down, and then it's like, yeah. And ball lightning is a real thing, by the way. I learned that also. I thought it was fake.
I know, that's interesting. Although I think that videos of it, I keep seeing videos of it that claim to be. I think the videos are fake. There's some of like ball lightning like near the ground, and I don't know if
people want to see it because it's such a rare occurrence.
Yeah.
But I don't think it happens much. But I believe it exists. A lot of types of lightning out there, Green. Watch out.
Well, how did you end up with the lightning though as the theme?
Oh, I picked lightning because we were in that storm when we were walking back from the concert, and I was thinking about like, well, what's an unusual thing that's happened to me in the last week that would inspire like me to look in a different direction, because I did start out with like the sexy haiku sequence, and then I just was like, I can't read that. Come on. Like my mom listens to this, although everybody else should read it, so I'm not leading by example on that front. But it seemed interesting, and then I realized like, hey, I don't actually know many different types of lightning. Like there has to be like a bunch of different types of lightning.
Mm-hmm.
And then I looked at the Wikipedia page, and then I was like, heat lightning, well, what would that be a metaphor for when it's like something distant that's not likely to like actually approach you, and then of course you have a way of popping into my poems.
Yeah. Well, I thought it would be a good sort of explanation. It's a good example of what you have to look for in something that's like you're talking about Bob Hickok's reference to a round stone, something to roll.
Yeah. I love when Bob Hickok said that on the Poetry Space on our Flow State episode, and he talked about the difference between a round stone and a flat stone. And a flat stone is when you're trying to write that poem and it's not rolling around and you just throw that stone. Or maybe he didn't talk about throwing it. I'm the one, I guess, talking about violence. But...
maybe chucking the stone that's not rolling down to the bottom of the hill is a
I would
Hyben.
hurl that thing.
All right. Well, thanks for sharing that, Katie. And I know you got Charlotte's downstairs, so you have to pop in and out. But
she might make a cameo later on, I think.
Oh, is she right there?
So she was, and then she went down the
Yeah.
stairs. So
All right.
yeah,
Well, I know you'll pop in and out and be back in a little bit,
I
but
will. I'll be listening to all of them for sure, but maybe on YouTube. So
okay,
thank you,
great. Well,
and yours as well. I'm excited for yours.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, yeah. So here is mine, and I was looking through and trying to think out what weird you could do, what strange things you could do, and I was thinking about how many phrases have hot in them. You know, like hot takes and hot stoves and hot irons, and there's so many hot things. You know, hot shit and hot stuff, and you know, hot and heavy. There's all sorts of hot things, and it's interesting how many phrases there are. And I started to do a sequence based on that, but I didn't like it. And then right before the show started, I had a different idea, and so this is the sequence. And I think this should be longer, but I had to keep the with the 1-page spirit max thing. This is the kind of thing that it should kind of roll on and on, but you can kind of imagine it continuing. But here it is. This is my hot take haiku. Okay, hot take haiku. And I should say too, in a sequence, you know, a lot of times it's an individual haiku. We will read the haiku multiple times. I think we should just read the haiku once, because they kind of link together in a way. So I would recommend that if anybody's wondering if they should read the haiku twice or once. I think twice is good for an individual haiku just sitting there, and probably once is good for a sequence. I think that's my impression of it. But anyway, here's hot take haiku. Shadows on the morning wall, hot. Glancing up from a long poem, hot. Pressing hard the pen to paper, hot. Frozen stiff, the weather vane, hot. Workers on the neighbor's roof, hot. The counter near the curling iron, hot. All the edges of the geodesic dome, hot. On the floor a pile of shoes, hot. In the kitchen every surface, hot. The sun all it sees and doesn't, hot. So I think you could go on and on and on like that. I think it'd be fun, kind of in a you know, the repetition of that, given all the ways we use the word hot, I thought was kind of fun to play with. But anyway, that is my hot take haiku. Let's see what everybody else has. And once again, I should remind you that you don't have to share the haiku for this week. All you have to do is, the prompt for this week can be prompts from any week, but any week you want. If you haven't, if you're somebody who usually can't catch the show, so can't share, feel free to share a prompt poem from past weeks. Let's go first to Jared Campbell.
Hello.
Hey, Jared, great to see you.
Good to see you.
So let me pull up what you got for us. But where did you take it? What are you doing?
Just summer haiku.
Gotcha.
There's all kind of clever interpretations you can do with a prompt, but it's like just do some summer haiku.
Yeah, well, it is a good haiku sequence for August, and there's heat waves all over the place. I think, you know, today up in the mountains in Wrightwood, it's too hot. You know, so what can you do?
Yep. All right. Cicadas singing their two confident notes. Abashed robins. Cicadas singing their two confident notes. Abashed robins. Sweltering. Sidewalks. Rain, but no relief. Evaporation smell. Sweltering sidewalks. Rain, but no relief. Evaporation smell. Howdy, neighbor. It's not the heat that gets you. It's the repetitiveness. Howdy, neighbor. It's not the heat that gets you. It's the repetitiveness. Hot, heavy air. Wispy clouds don't even know. Hot, heavy air. Wispy clouds don't even know. Heavy, throbbing air. Cicadas, lawnmowers. Heavy, throbbing air. Cicadas, lawnmowers. Going out to walk, a solid wall of heat. Returning home, a solid wall of AC. Solidity is a walking into. Dandelions. Hated, stubborn, surviving. Independence Day. Dandelions. Hated, stubborn, surviving Independence Day. Iced tea. Remembering grandma's iced tea. Iced tea. Remembering grandma's. Iced tea. Itching redness. Evidence. Mosquito past. Itching, redness, evidence, mosquito past. Lightning bug. unpoetic interval. Lightning bug. Lightning bug, unpoetic interval, lightning bug. Hot, heavy air. Am I repeating myself? Life is repetitive. Hot, heavy air. Am I repeating myself? Life is repetitive.
Yeah, and then it's sort of a bit of a haiku too, because you have the drawing of a dandelion over on the side. I love that as well. And some really nice, I love some of these haiku, Jared. The interesting one, going out to walk, solid heat, wall of heat, returning home, solid wall of AC. So literally is a walking into. That's like so many syllables. We talk about how, a haiku generally, 575 is too long. But that I think shows that it can work even longer, because it still is the units of thought are there, and the extent of it sort of works. And I love the iced tea, remembering grandma's iced tea too. Really good stuff. Thanks so much for sharing that, Jared.
All right. Thank you.
Yep, that was Jared Campbell with his summer haiku sequence. And as I thought we do have a lot of folks on the lines here, given it's the midday instead of the night. And a new first-time caller, I believe, Alan Tompkins is up next. Hey, Alan.
Hello. This is my first time, so bear with me. I'm not technically savvy here.
No problem, but it's great to have you on. I recognize the name. Where are you calling from?
New York, Liberty, New York. Yeah. So I sent it into Mrs. Dozier, and I was thinking of just how climate change and like poison ivy and then bloodroot came up. So, and then I wrote another poem, Tree of Tears. So I'll read bloodroot first. And I did it in sort of a traditional haiku condensed narrative. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
All right. The bloodroot, impish spring, native, pale petals cleanse, a pure path. Tree of Tears, Brazil lightning, dogs wine, rubber forest.
Yeah, both very interesting. Yeah, thanks so much for sharing that. So
Thank you.
haiku. Yeah, thanks. Great to have you on, and hope you join again soon.
Thanks.
Yep, it was Alan Tompkins, and Adrian Thompson, I should say, with the two haiku in the sequence, Bloodroot and Tree of Tears. All right, and then next, let's go to Christiana Doucette.
Hello. Good morning.
Hey, Christiana, good to see you.
Good to see you too. So I was going back and forth between two different sequences, a little bit like Katie. The one that I'm not bringing today was actually based on my great-grandmother's romance, which was she worked as at the telephone boards, like a switchboard. And my grandfather's stepfather was a reporter in the area, and she would feed him tips, and then they started dating, and then they got married.
Oh, wow, that's great.
So it was like hot off the press was the kind of theme. But I decided instead to go with this other one because it flowed a little bit better, and I think I still need to work on the first concept before I share it. So this one is Hot Shop, and it's about like a blown glass. And I was just thinking about well, number one, like that's one of the hottest places I have ever stepped into. I have not personally blown glass, but I'm really fascinated by the process. And we like to watch like Blown Away on Netflix, and we like to, watch all that goes into this. So that's what I've done here. Do you want me to go ahead and start?
Yeah, go ahead. I got it. Yep, go ahead.
Sure. Hot Shop. Composition in flux. Hourglass insides melt minutes into new chemistry. Honey in a red pot, a buzz of activity at the golden hive. A spool of gold thread glows in the dim workshop. She gathers herself. Blowing bubbles, her wand spins reflections through the crystal ball. The sheer pull of raising cane, one tug too many, splinters. I'm going to read that one other way too. The sheer pull of raising cane, one tug too many, splinters. Taffy pull workout, blue bubblegum strands stretch from primary to pastel. A spinning golden globe, caned with crisscross color, grows each glowing breath. Back to glory. Heated, she glowers, then grins, flushed with success. Cinch and crimp and snip, the new curve of this figure, too hot to handle. Tapping into art, a final pinch, she snaps at the knockoff table. A bonfire bouquet, chiastic honeybees absorb a cool blue orb. True chemistry's pull, minutes melt into hours, an influx of compositions.
Oh, that's great. I love that. The Hot Shop from Christiana Doucette. And we have a friend of ours in town. Him and his wife both blow glass. And it is amazing to watch.
It is so cool.
Yeah, it really is. He's a neon artist. And so it's like blowing tubes for the neon and all sorts of, I mean, it's wild to go to his shop. So really fun. I have to share that poem with him.
Yeah. Thank you for letting me read.
Yeah, actually, that was great. Thanks, Christiana.
Bye.
Yeah, that was Christiana Doucette with Hot Shot. And next, let's go to Rod Deasy.
Hi, Tim. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Okay. I did a sequence. I'm not sure they all rise to the level of haiku, but nevertheless, it's just called Hot Haiku. Warm cold front. Snowflakes catch sunlight. Heat advisory. Stand sans child, sans lemonade. Heat mirage. Blacktop ghosts, rain dance. Heat stroke. Noon sculler, slow rose. In hot water, geese discuss flying north. Summer sidewalk, dropped eggs, scramble. Blistering heat, hot on our heels. Go green.
Very cool. I love those, Rod. I like the geese in the hot water. They're my favorite one, I think. Thanks for sharing those.
Thanks.
That was Roderick Deasy with Hot Haiku. Yeah, really good stuff all around so far. And it's nice to do haiku as a prompts, because there's this whole world of haiku journals and magazines and stuff we can all be sending these to, too. We got to remember. It's like a wholly sort of a separate universe, and it's a big one. I was trying to think of who is in a terrible time right now, and I don't really know because my math is, but I think Hamid Malik, it might be, usually it's early, it might be very, very late there. So hey Hamid, how you doing?
Hey.
Yeah, what time is it? Very late? It just occurred to me that it's probably like 4 a.m. or something, or worse.
No, 2:30. 2:30.
2:30. Yeah. So that's pretty late.
Not too bad.
So thanks for staying up with us there in Australia. So what do you have for us today?
Okay, mine went in a different direction. Anger Man. Word cocktail flung through my ears. Hear the fire. Heat waves, my cool goodbye, bastard. He steams the windows red. Cool air, your steam shows off again. Marshmallow, I toast under your collar. And then this is out of sequence, but I wanted to do what everybody else was doing. So I thought one. After dinner, mint, X-rated NFT. And for Katie prompts, curtains open, Hyben world.
That's great. I love that too. Yeah, thanks for sharing those. Those are all wonderful. I love the two bonus ones. And then also, it's a great example of how you can use the Hyben type principle of having a title that reads into the poem in a different way and makes you realize what's going on, kind of, so Anger Man completely changes the way you read those, which is really interesting too. So thanks for sharing that, Hamid. Great stuff.
Thank you.
And thanks for staying up with us. I hope you get a good night's sleep.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was Hamid Malik with Anger Man. Let's go to. I think I'm trying to see if anybody else would be at a really really bad time, and I think everybody else is just well, Nivi. It's kind of getting a little later in India. Let's go to Nivi next. I think in India it's probably like getting up to like 11 or something like that. Hey Nivi.
Hey Tim, how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing great, thank you. Loved the show.
Yeah, it was fun. It's always fun. We have one guest from India too, and you get a little extra insight from Nivi in the comments. I liking the things you were adding. So, what do you have to share for today?
I have a hot haiku sequence. Sort of on the same vein as Hemant. I took hot to mean angry, hot-tempered. That makes sense. So, yeah, that's sort of where it kind of started, but didn't really end there. So. It's sort of a progression, if I may use the word.
Okay, well, let's hear it. Looking forward to it.
The mind thunders. Storm clouds gather in the heart. Lightning. Hot-tempered. Like embers, sharp and fierce, hurtful words scorch. A boiling sea of silence. Words crash on the shore. Rage burns bright, fades fast to ash. In the echoes of a fire spent, peace grows from the coals.
I love the way that does transition. That's a really nice sense of movement there with the last haiku. Thanks, Nivi, for sharing that. Sort of a meta poem aspect of it.
From lightning to anger to everything, and just melted it into one without realizing it.
Well, it feels like you're sort of like talking yourself out of anger by the end, by like venting it. It's a really nice, nice movement. Well, thanks so much. Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Thank you, Tim. Have a good day.
Yep, you too. Have a good night. That's Nivi DeKarthik with another hot haiku sequence. And let's go next. We'll just get in the regular order now. And Mike Bales is up next.
Morning. I had to rush for this one. I'm not that much of a morning person.
Yeah, me neither.
We had the karaoke playoffs. All I can say, main thing I could say is it was on a bigger venue, and 23 of us were. There are two playoff rounds. 23 of us are giving the performances of our lives in a big venue. So I've never been in a venue like that before.
That's really neat. What is your favorite song to sing in the karaoke, Mike? I think we asked you before, but I don't remember.
I think it's changing a little bit. I will. It is a great ballad. I still like the song I Don't Know. I was going to sing it last night, but I didn't feel up to going out. The thing I might sing best is Wonderful Tonight by Eric Clapton. I was getting strong reactions from it even before I was finished with the song. So,
yeah, that's very cool. Well, it'd be nice someday to be able to see you doing the karaoke there if we ever come through your neck of the woods.
I was pining away. My cousins are 500 miles away, and I was going to myself, boy, I wish they were down here.
Yeah, well, good luck in the playoffs. So, what do you got for a haiku sequence for us?
I didn't make it, but it was a wonderful night. There's a lot of talent around here.
Yeah, well, sounds like a lot of fun, Mike. So what do you got for haiku?
The trouble I had with writing this hot poem, first I was puzzled by the prompt. And the trouble I had writing with prompt poem was that it was a cool day.
Yeah, well, that's nice.
So. I think the title kind of refers maybe to the heat. It's the sequence is called Respite. Cold spell on a cloudy day. Summer takes a rest. Solitary drive down a narrow street to a veil of clouds. Library stands at the edge of town. Nearby fields linger. A thicket of trees shimmers outside, lost in reflections. A bubbling stream speaks a language its own. Talk of weather we share, drawn to each other. August afternoon, one day closer to fall, time of passage.
Oh, yeah, very nice. Thanks for sharing. I love the bubbling stream speaks its own language. Thanks for sharing that, Mike Bales.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Take care. As Mike Bales with a respite, he named that haiku sequence. Let's go next to Colin.
Hello there. Good morning.
And it's Colin. What was your last name, Colin? I can't remember.
Yeah, Colin Sandberg.
Sandberg, that's right. I was trying to pull it up in my memory. Okay, so great to see you, Colin. Thanks for coming out. It's been like a couple months.
It has. It's good to be back.
So what did you do you could share?
I think my haiku sequence kind of goes through a summer day that I had just like last month, and with some creative liberties, put in, and so this one is called Vapor.
Okay.
Vapor, sliding into the chill of my Birkenstocks, first sip of morning coffee, breath prayer, the vibrant exhale of tiger lilies, sepia sun, California firs in our sky, July bike ride, the asphalt's breath on my thighs, invasive wishes, the baseball field full of moons, neon stars, the Gatorade and I glisten, sticky fingers, the honey tones of her hair, sprinkles sinking into our milkshake, clouded moon, the cool spots from her kisses. After party, lost in the friction of wind-tossed leaves, ghost limbs, my ribcage missing her arms.
Very nice. My favorite one is that invasive wishes, the baseball field full of moons, and it's not just baseball bias. I like that one a lot. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Glad to have you back on, Colin.
It's good to be back.
Yeah,
Thank
that was Colin Sandberg with Vapor with his sequence. Let's go next to Rose Leonard.
Hi there.
Hey, Rose, great to see you. I don't know, have you been on before? I recognize you from the comments all the time.
Yeah, I haven't been on in person.
Oh, great. Well, I'm so glad you could.
You've done a critique of the week, but I haven't actually appeared.
Uh-huh.
And obviously, I'm from the UK, so the timings haven't worked for me before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it is a nice reason. I like to have the shows at different times sometimes just for that, because I'd love to see you and glad to have you on here, even though it's so late during the regular time.
Great. So I don't have any haikus, I'm afraid. I'm going way back to an idiom prompt where we were prompted to take an idiom and take it literally and see where that took us. And I found this quite fun. Okay. So it's called, you have to dig deep. Sometimes it's not enough to scratch the surface because grass always grows back, and besides, bare soil just makes a seedbed where anything could take root. You have to dig deep. And to dig deep, you need a good spade with a sharp blade that you scrape the clay from as you go. And the spade sunk and levered just so against your knee, under the lug of your boot, will slice, and the earth will release its funk as you scalp the cap of sod and heap rich loam like fruit cake on afternoon tea china. Later, you will need a pickaxe, which you can swing above your head and let its own forged weight embed it in hard ground. And if you do this right, the thing will do the work for you. The only price it will exact will be blisters on your palms, and the smooth wood handle grows dark and wet as your body fluids leak with each heft. It will be worth it to see bedrock shatter beneath the hard beak's peck. In weeks to come, your palms will thicken and callous until you forget that your hand ever held a pen or a child's hand. The pit you dig will be wide as well as deep, for how else can you wield the pick? You must climb down there to stand within the moor. And if it is winter, shadows will fall across the hole you labour in, and you will also forget about roots and leaves and anything soft. When you dig deep, you come to stone, and water seeps cold around your boots. Your bones ache from the shock of iron hitting rock. Your skull beats and rings like a struck bell. You have long ago forgotten why you left behind your home, your children, rainbows, maybe coal, maybe gold, buried deep, calling.
Oh, that's a wonderful poem. Like the understated, unspoken nature of that. It's really, really powerful. Good stuff. You have to dig deep. What was the prompt for that, Rose?
It was take an idiom, any idiom, and take it literally and see where it takes you. So I just kind of started with it and just followed it, let it take me.
Yeah, well, very fun. I'm so glad you could share that. It's nice to have a break, and I was hoping we'd have some breaks in the haiku too by having the different time and some older poems. And it's nice to have a different length too jumped into the mix today.
And thank Katie for the prompt, because that's been published with Black Iris, so
wonderful.
It's gone on to find a home.
Oh,
so
that's great.
Nice.
Yeah, we always love to hear it when that happens. Yeah, thanks so much for sharing that, Rose. Really wonderful poem.
Thank you.
Yeah, great to have you on. Hopefully we'll have an earlier time again where we can have you on soon.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah,
Take
great.
care.
Thanks, Tim. Cheers.
Yep, bye. Yeah, it was Rose Leonard with You Have to Dig Deep. And next, let's go to another first-time caller, I believe Richard Mata.
Hi, Tim.
Hey, Richard, good to see you. It's your first time on, right?
It is my first time. I actually met you at a conference.
Which one?
Yeah, I think it was the haiku.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, great. Yeah, you look familiar. The name is familiar, so I wasn't sure if you'd been on before or not, but it's good to have you on. So where are you calling from?
San Diego. And I found out about this from Monica, in fact, because she knows I'm often in the haiku galaxy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, great to have you on. And always, we love haiku, in Rattle. We're always looking for more, and we have haiku issues, hoping to get more good haiku in, because the haiku is just wonderful, and I don't like the way that the two universes don't really overlap as much as they should.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right, so let's hear what you got for us.
Yeah. I guess I was hungry when I wrote this. Summer love. Fondue. We play pickup sticks between fondles. S'mores. A long, slow breath cools fiery hills. Spicy corn dog. A shell encases fireworks. Shish kebab. Probing the perfume of pineapple.
Oh, that's really wonderful. I love the corn dog. Spicy corn dog, a shell encases fireworks. Really good stuff all around, and makes me feel like summer. Thanks for sharing that, Richard. Glad to have you on.
Thanks.
Yeah, that was Richard Motto with Summer Love. Let's go to Tina Dennetclaw next. Are you there, Tina?
Oh, I'm here. You caught me out of my chair. Hang on.
No problem.
So in the morning, our cats are much more vocal, so I might have an accompaniment.
Oh, no problem. We love the cat chorus in the background.
Oh, yeah, it's actually that one cat who's my husband's rival is the one who's the most vocal, so you'll get to hear his chorus.
Well, great.
Yeah, I was really sorry about of course, I would be next now. Okay. And so, it's not starting the video. There we go.
There you go. Hello,
all right. I'm so sorry. Make everybody wait.
No, it's okay. It's okay. So you have, just out of the corner of my eye, this is interesting because there's the singular and the plural, which is an interesting thing you're playing with. So what did you do with this prompt?
So, okay, I don't want to give up too much personal information. I know this is all about really personal stuff, but sometimes we get reminded that life doesn't go on forever. And this last year has been a real journey for my husband and myself. Mm-hmm. And it hasn't been any rate. Sometimes you get reminded that it's the small moments. So I didn't really understand the assignment. So I wrote a haiku of a very poignant moment for me. Mm-hmm. And then when I understood the concept, then I went through and then I had to change that one to make it fit. And then it's like, no, I guess it's my darling that I can't kill. And so I just decided to break the rules. And
well, that's fine. As long as, the whole goal is that prompts inspire poems wherever they take you. So I don't feel bad about not being on task. As long as it, generated a poem, that's all we're hoping for.
Oh, okay. I really appreciate it. So, and then hopefully by the end, you'll see that I do, at least in my mind, it fits to do that. Okay. So we'll see. And then I've got a different cat with me now. Okay. Okay. Moment. Sorting through apples alone, missing my husband. Soft touch to my side. Moments. First glance, I wondered, what is his future? He liked my red sweater. Across the table, his gaze and words make me smile. My heart opens full. Laughter not guarded. I speak my mind, no filter. My thoughts safe with him. Asleep in soft chair. Gentle presence, spring sweater. Sleepy memory. Sorting through apples, missing my husband, surprised, his touch by my side. Life's arc yet unknown, tender since we began, 45 years in.
Oh, it's such a touching sequence, especially that first one, the sorting through apples. Really, really touching poems, and sorry it's been a difficult time, but
oh, that's poems. Okay. It was like he finally got to the point where he could come in to the grocery store with me, but he'd gotten used to doing work in the car waiting for me.
Mm-hmm.
So he didn't want to come in. He wanted to read his paper. And it's like, and I guess, I don't know if it was the way I was walking or somehow he just psychically, felt it. But later he said, you just look so alone. Oh. It's like, oh my gosh, I felt alone because I've been waiting and waiting so long.
Yeah.
And yeah, he just showed up.
Oh, well, that's wonderful.
So,
yeah.
Yeah, that's a wonderful moment.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you for listening.
Yeah, well, thanks so much. Very touching stuff. Thanks, Tina, for sharing that.
Thank you. Thank you.
It was Tina Dennettclaw with a Moment and Moments. Next, let's go to spin around. Let's go to Brian O'Sullivan.
Tim. Hi,
hey, Brian. Good to see you.
Good to see you. I have a sequence that tries to take just heat imagery through the seasons.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Yeah, it's called The Heat of Winter. Spring showers, fan flames, whiskey. Hot fudge Sunday, summer swim. Walnut trees stripped down, flakes of fire. Sparks tango in the fireplace, glaciers melt.
Very cool. I love the first and the last best. Yeah, really nice sequence there, Brian.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. That was Brian O'Sullivan with The Heat of Winter. I like the concept too. All right, let's go next to. Let's see. We gotta try to go in order again. Holly Elliott is up next. I believe Holly, you've been on before, right?
Yes, I have once. Before.
Yeah. Okay. Well, great to see you again. Thanks for having you on and coming back. So, what do you have for us today?
So I actually wrote two hot haiku sequences. I'm reworking the first one. And in both of these, I transformed them into haiku sonnets. Somehow they just kind of.
Oh, haiku sonnets. That's an interesting concept. So, what is a haiku sonnet?
Well, a haiku sonnet is you've got the 4 haikus, and then you add a couplet at the end, just to kind of bring it up to the 14 lines.
So, that's interesting. Yeah.
And so, well, yeah, and it's one that it's a new form, relatively new form for me. I think I first encountered it maybe in the spring.
Mm-hmm.
There was something local that we were doing and kind of around haikus, and I don't remember when. I think it might have been Writer's Digest or something. They had one of their little add-ons was a list of various forms, and I saw the haiku sonnet. And I was like, oh, that's cool.
Yeah, that is. That's a neat concept. Okay.
So that's what I did. And so on this one, and I gave it a title, and it's Count to 3. And anyway, exchanging words, arbitrary truth, all the rage. Social highway, red-headed friends crossing the line. Book burning rally, civics lesson tied to the stake. Global warming, Mother Nature, cooking our goose. In contentious times, cooler heads prevail.
Oh, very interesting. Yeah, the idea of the haiku sonnet, I like that. And it adds to the sense of like the progression and summarizing it, using that structure in a haiku sequence is really interesting. And I love that arbitrary truth phrase. I have to think about that a lot more. It seems like there's a lot of arbitrary truth going on these days. So I love all the different places you went with that.
Yeah, and it's kind of one of those things where with the title is playing with that, a count to 3, it kind of tied into the close, but it's also just pointing to the haiku 3-line structure
Yeah, a lot of like double entendres in that title. Count to three. Count to three until you cool off, and all. In addition to the haiku, doing many things. Yeah, really neat idea, Hallie. Thanks for sharing that. It was Hallie Elliott with Count to Three. Next, let's go to at a reasonable hour for once, Siobhan Brownlee.
Hello.
Hi, it's great to see
Tim.
you.
So I had a different take from other people, mainly because of where I live. So I took the expression hot spot, which can have the meaning of a place where there's danger and violence. And it's because this week, on the 8th of August, was the 80th commemoration of when the town that I live in, Le Mans, was liberated from German occupation by American soldiers. And so there was lots of American music of the 1940s. It was great. And also my neighbor downstairs told me that her mother, when she was 18 at the time, had a romance with an American soldier. And I said, how did they actually meet? And she said, oh, they were in the main square, which is called Republic Square. And he said to her, hey, sweetie, do you want a chewing gum? So I put that in my poem.
Very fun. Okay, yeah, let's hear it.
So it's called Hotspot. Kreiskommandatur. Sunflowers sprout up regardless. Ascending sirens. Scamper down to the cellar. Ration tickets. Bread, milk, oil, meat, sugar, shoes. Train sabotage. Workers counter coercion. Shackles. Jews, gypsies, communists, resistors. Heart pumping, parachute dropping into the black. Bombed, stomach torn from buildings and people. A quad of years, boxed in, squeezed, binned. Then, American soldiers, crossing of the only bridge remaining. Republik Square. Hey, sweetie, do you want a chewing gum? Saxophone swing, jiving, hot, breathing.
Oh, very fun and memorable sequence there, Siobhan. What is that first word? Because I can't, don't have time to look it up right now. That Kreiskommandatur.
Yeah, that was, it's when the Germans came and they took over the whole running of the city. So they had the administrative running. So that was their kind of the name for their administrative headquarters.
Yeah, very cool. I could tell that I loved that, even though I didn't know what that word meant, but I love the second half of it. So it's really neat to hear that sunflowers sprout up regardless. Yeah, really cool. Thanks for sharing that, Siobhan.
Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That was a Hotspot by Siobhan Brownlee. Next, let's go to Monica Dobos.
Well, hello, everyone.
Hey, Monica. Yeah, great to see you.
I was so glad Katie suggested the haiku sequence. I haven't written haiku for quite some time, so this was an interesting try. People might call me names after reading this. It's okay. I'm just going to let the poem speak for itself.
Okay.
And probably the title doesn't quite work, but I'll work on it. So it's called Braided Love. AC broken. I fan my wings with their chatter. The budgie's tongue, one fire. My nipples harden. Epilating my legs, knock on door. Only the mailman. Battle over bird bath. Water everywhere. Love got here first.
Well, I love that. I love how bold you went with it. I really like that, Monica. Thanks for sharing that.
I love my birds. They're an inspiration, and I'm learning a lot from them.
Well, very neat. Yeah. So you have to have a photo of that sometime.
I know. Yeah, I should.
Yeah. Well, very cool. Well, thanks for sharing that.
Thank you.
Thanks. That was Monica Dobos with Braided Love. And next, let's go to Zachary Honeycutt.
Good afternoon, Tim.
Hey, Zach, how you doing?
I'm doing great. How you guys doing today?
Doing great. Yeah, it's a good morning. I mean, nothing's really happened yet other than the show, but the show's been great. So
Had to wake myself up and stop getting my beauty rest so I could be on here on this Sunday.
Well, thanks for making the sacrifice. So what do you have for us?
Okay, so I tried, this was my attempt at the summer heat haiku, and as you'll see when I read it, there's a common thread throughout, but I won't tell you guys what it is. I'll just read it and let you figure it out. Flowers in the summer. Dingbat romantic, embroiled in a lost love's heat, yet cool as a cat. Drawing from a dog, as inspired as Da Vinci, with words Mary paints. Children play outside, a rushed summertime hibin, pulling a Katie. As surely as summer's heat, the haiku queen still holds up her shimmering crown. Read an old book with burning interest, must be Mary Lisa's fame. Oh, Miss Calorie, read and detected the ghost of your jostled heart. A hot spot of crime, the fourth wall breaks, Tim's rule too. Loomis lies here upon page 2.
That is really funny, Zach. Thanks so much and so for those just listening, that last line goes on to page 2, playing with the fact that that Zach likes to push the boundaries, physical boundaries on the page. Thanks for sharing that, Zach. And so really fun thread to go through too. So a lot of people represented here in this poem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I did a spoof when I did on 255, the beginning of that spoof. I made fun of you and I made fun of a lot of the guy poets, but I realized there were no lady poets, and we have some great lady poets on the show. So I thought I would represent each one of them by a haiku.
Yeah, well, very cool. And especially when you didn't mention my names, people can guess who they are, because it's kind of obvious too. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I'm sure, I don't think Katie's right in front of the camera, but I think she really enjoys the Rush Summertime Hibin being her entry. Thanks for sharing that, Zach.
Thank you, guys. See you guys next week.
Yep, that was Zachary Honeycutt with Flowers in the Summer. Nice title, too. All right, let's go. Let's see, we're almost, let's see, who's left? Bishwashit Mishra is here.
Hi, Tim.
Hey, Biz, great to see you.
Good to see you, too. It's a great show.
Yeah, fun. Thanks. So you've got a braided haiku. This looks like an interesting setup, too. Like you did a lot with this.
Yeah, it's a short poem. I forgot to send a link to you. I posted it in the Facebook. I'll send it. I submit. There's an essay on Frog Pond by Pravat Kumar Padi, who basically invented this kind of a haiku. It's braided. You can see there's a normal face. There's an italicized portion. Like the first 3, there's a 2 monocues and a duostage in between, right? And they come and combine. The normal faces will form a haiku, and the italicized portions will form. It's like you braid one after the other.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
That's how it's braided. It's very difficult to do. I think
it seems like it would be really hard.
Very
it really
hard.
Does.
So I'm trying, because they have to work independently as standalone haiku, either monoku. They have to meet all the requirements, and then they should make sense. So this is the second time I tried, but I might polish it. But let's go ahead. It's a short one.
Yeah,
so there are 2 pieces there. So 1, heat wave, rippling water. Duck families cooling off a late afternoon pond. In my reflection, shaking houses. Heat wave, a late afternoon pond, shaking houses. Rippling water, duck families cooling off in my reflection. Part 2, parched lawn, pricking feet. Bared to my skin, how to trade on this hard ground. All this burning, peeling off. Parched lawn, how to trade on this hard ground, peeling off. Pricking feet, bare to my skin, all this burning.
Oh, that is fascinating. I love that form. I've never seen it before, but it's really well done.
Yeah, it's
and hard to
relatively
do.
new. Yeah, relatively new. I'll send the link. I forgot to send the link, but I posted it on Facebook. I'll
Yeah,
send
so
it.
it's anyway,
It's
I'll
a
find
nice
that
essay.
too. Yeah, so
Yeah,
if
it's
he's
a
talking
nice
about the Prompt Lines Facebook group. So if anybody wants to find that, all you have
Yeah.
to do is go to, well, I can't do it right now because I'm streaming on Facebook, but you can go to the Prompt Lines group in Facebook and join. And it's a really fun place. Everyone's sharing their prompts. It's very active and hospitable. And you can find the essay that Biz
very
is
nice.
talking about there.
And I'll post a link on this YouTube link too.
Okay,
after
great.
I
Yeah, thank you.
sign off so that people can check.
Well, very, very fun. That seems like worth an effort. It seems really hard, though, too.
Yeah, it's hard, but it's interesting. I mean, I just thought it's a new form, cool form. Let's try.
Yeah, well,
So
very cool.
Yeah, it gives you a little more freedom to try different subjects. Like you can do better because you write scientific things. I don't know much science about, but that form will work very well if I could write about science and physics and space. That'll be very nice to write about.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, good idea. Yeah, so it's the braided haiku form. Yeah, very neat. Thanks for sharing that, Biz.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Yep,
Tim.
you too. There's Biswajit Mishra with braided haiku heat wave. And Chelsea McClellan has jumped on the Zoom. Hey, Chelsea, how you doing?
Hey, I'm doing all right. Yeah, I just got home, so
well, I'm glad you could
wasn't
make
sure.
it.
I also am not sure if it made it to you because I didn't get a response email.
No,
I tried to send it. I don't know.
No, I didn't. Yeah, I did. Let's
don't
see.
have too many odd words.
Yeah, I don't have it. So maybe and there's only one. Steve Harrell has one in the spam. Sorry, Steve, but yours isn't in spam either. So I'm not sure what happened to it.
Okay.
We have Chelsea McGlynn's. Is she here? But anyway, yeah. So do you want to just read it, Chelsea? And we'll listen.
Yeah,
Okay.
there's not any weird words. Well, there's none. So
Okay.
we'll call it cycles. Pressure canning, for better or for worse, the weight shakes. Overfilled, the kettle floods the flame. Evening cools a hothead, pruning fruit. A warm front, overnight, snuggles.
I love that. Good progression there too. Each of those is a really nice haiku, Chelsea. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm glad you could make it in time. All right, take care. It was Chelsea McClellan with. Was there a title to that, Chelsea?
Cycles.
Cycles. Okay. Yeah, very nice. Well, thanks for sharing that. It was Cycles by Chelsea McClellan. All right, and a couple people asked me to read. So Mary Keating asked me to read this for her, and we'll do that because these are short. We can read a couple of haiku as well before we move on to the Sciku portion. And this is Chelsea, or no, that was Chelsea. This is Mary Keating's. Wanting. Stolen threads, sheer summertime wickedness. 4th of July, sun flares are fireworks. We heat up until nuclear family expulsion. Hot dog in a blanket with a touch of chili. Menopause, hot flashes too hot for sex. Pumpkin pie air conditioning cuts uneven slices. Oh, very nice. There's a haiku sequence by Mary Keating. Wanting, she called it. And then I also saw Ted Guevara here. Let's do Ted's. So Ted includes a photo, as always, and this is a really interesting, I don't know if you can, I might have to zoom in a little bit, but this is a photo of a sort of a bird's nest made out of barbed wire where the birds are rusty pliers. So it's all this like rusty, wiry, bird nesty thing with pliers is like the beaks of the birds. It's a really interesting piece of art. Oops, let's do this. So let's take a look at Ted Bernal Guevara's haiku. 7 haiku on rust, he calls it. Tiny magpies nestle in a crown of spikes. Mismatched sky. Ephemeral, the corrode of nature. The twining whim of our understanding. The oxide of dream. But we, in brutal joy, is morale to rust. Yet we clean with the rain. The thought of never flies off. Very interesting. So that sort of in a way, it braids a narrative with haiku in an interesting way too, because you can read it sort of straight through or sort of pause in the way haikus are. So interesting one, Ted. There's Ted Bernal Guevara with 7 haiku on rust. And I believe that is all the haiku sequences. Let's see. Yeah. Well, Dan Smith emailed me, asks he's having trouble getting into the Zoom. So Zoom, so share the Zoom link, Dan. It was just moments ago he emailed, so I think he's watching. I shared the Zoom link, and then you find it on the chat windows. But he's asking me to read the poem too. So this is the poem, "The Poignant Now When Asking Why or How," and I think it's I can try to see what I think it's from a past prompt. So. But I don't see what the prompt was, so we'll have to figure it out. But anyway, this is the poem, again, from Dan Smith. And it's called this, "The Poignant Now When Asking Why and How." I like the title. "Summer's such an easy thing. Spring, fall, not an easy thing. And oh, those winter Sundays, nowadays an uneasy thing. Spring sprung, rhythms gaily dance. Ignore fall, the easy thing. In the careless days, now years gone, thoughts of you, an easy thing. Reckless with such poignancy, love is not a measly thing." Very interesting. So that could almost be a haiku sequence too. An interesting use of the form there. And it was Dan Smith with "The Poignant Now When Asking Why and How." And that's going to wrap up the show. Let's do the Sciku really quickly, then get Katie back on the line. So the Sciku for this week is based on this article from the University of Chicago. And I have to, once again, shrink this to a tiny screen so it can fit, because they like to pretend everyone's on a phone these days. This is the article. Scientists lay out revolutionary method to warm Mars. And basically, this is Mars, of course, is a similar kind of planet. It lacks a lot of things Earth does. Doesn't have the magnetic field's a big problem. Also doesn't have an atmosphere, so it can't trap heat, so it's very cold, and we've been thinking about terraforming Mars for a long time because of that. Like, what could we do to make Mars habitable so we can have a second planet there? And these scientists at the University of Chicago proposed and modeled out a new idea of making sort of artificial greenhouse gases, kind of, not even gases, but particles that would be suspended in the atmosphere out of materials that are already there. So there's a lot of iron and a lot of aluminum on Mars, and they find a way to take those and turn them into these little nanoparticles, kind of like glitter, that would be suspended in the atmosphere, and it wouldn't even take that much. So if they just put out the problem with like putting out other greenhouse gases, it'd take a ton, like tons and tons of greenhouse gases. But this they could do without much at all, and just with, I think they say 30 liters per second is all it would take to make Mars warm within a few decades. So that's pretty impressive and pretty cheap. So it's a possible way to, and then once you have it warmth, microbes can start making oxygen, and you can start sort of a life cycle going on, and then some of things take care of themselves like they did on our own planet Earth. So that's the article for this week that was interesting. And the Sciku inspired by that is this. Oops. There it is. Terraforming Mars, a mirror ball. Terraforming Mars, a mirror ball. That is the Sciku for this week, and that is the show for this week. Let's pop over to our prompt poems editor, Katie Dozier. Hey, Katie.
Hello.
Yeah, glad to have you back. We have a special guest in the chair there. Hi, Charlotte.
Hi. It's Chip. Say hi. Hi. Hi.
So Charlotte was good all through the show, I assume.
Yeah, I loved really getting to listen to everybody's haiku sequences. Everybody did a great job, and I love getting to see how people interpret it differently.
Yeah, that's always the fun with one of those seemingly narrow prompts. It lets you explore and see where people take it. So that was a lot of fun too.
Well, I didn't think it was a narrow prompt to me. Well. You know what? One thing that's interesting about doing this is that it does prompt me to think about different interpretations of the same word. And so when I notice one that has like a ton, I kind of catalog it, which is nice. So I was really glad to see that everybody went in interesting ways, as I expected, because everybody's great, obviously. But
yeah, it's really great to see the progression of haiku too. Like if we'd done a haiku prompt, like 4 years ago,
Yeah.
So many would not actually be haiku.
Yeah.
Because people, most people who read regular poetry don't understand haiku at all, but we've been doing the work, trying to let people know, how haiku actually works. So it's nice to see real haiku there.
It's true. I mean, I'm always on Twitter being like, haiku's not just 575, and then getting like one angry person that I converse with about it. So that's my life.
Exactly. But those were all, none of them was just a 575 non-cut thing.
Really,
it was, they were all real haiku. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So what is the prompt for next week? What do you got for us?
Okay, so the prompt for next week, is to, I'll say the prompt, and Charlotte's going for your camera equipment over on your computer. Time is limited. All right. So the prompt is to write a poem with your least favorite word to appear in a poem and make it the title of the poem. So this came from a very specific sort of inspiration. So I really like George Bulgares, who of course has been on the Rattlecast and is one of my absolute favorite poets, and is going to be on the Poetry Space next week too, which I'm really excited about. Anyway, he has his free newsletter, Poetry Town, and if you're not subscribed to it, you should totally subscribe. But anyway, the poem a few days ago was called Tension by Billy Collins, and it was a Billy Collins poem I hadn't read before, and it starts with an epigraph about how the word suddenly is basically a funny, like a bad word to use. And I didn't realize that he felt that way, because I've said before that suddenly is my least favorite word to see in a poem. Like it just never works. And of course, as soon as you say it never works, there's a way to make it work, which is why I love poetry in part. But anyway, so there's a poem about that, and that got me thinking about like, well, what is everyone's least favorite word, and us trying to take that and make something of it. So I think
and you say your favorite word least favorite word in a poem, so it's sort of a specific context.
It's totally different. Like I know, like a lot of people's general, like if you ask somebody what their least favorite word is, moist is a very common one. Or chunks. Like words like that, but that's different. I think it's a lot different than in a poem.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, there's like sort of a words that grate on poems.
Yeah, exactly. Just,
too poety and whatnot.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it will be an interesting way to like basically, if you don't like the poem, you have to turn from the title in some way to make the poem a successful poem. So I think it's a more challenging one, to be honest. But I'm looking forward to it. And I think I'm going to maybe allow myself to not pick suddenly. But I don't know.
Well, there's a lot of words I find annoying too. So it's going to be easy to pick a word, I think. And then we'll see what comes of it.
Yeah.
Well, that's a very fun prompt. Thanks, Katie.
Yeah, thank you. I love how Charlotte's like the cat cameo. So we don't normally get a toddler cameo.
I wouldn't be surprised, to see her just jumping off like the top and landing.
Come here. She's like going to land here. She was earlier, though. She was playing with a rattle. So I was thinking, you want to play with the rattle again? Because that's funny. Because how many people play with the rattle on the rattle prompt line? Yay, rattle! She likes it. Anyway, thank you.
All right. Well, good to see you both, Katie. Thanks for being here.
All right.
And doing all you do. We always appreciate it.
Well, thank you for doing all you do.
Thanks.
Okay, bye.
Yeah, that was Katie Dozier, our prompt poems editor, with her prompt for the week, which once again was to write a poem with your least favorite word to appear in a poem as the title. Include why it's your least favorite poem in the submission notes. So just when you're submitting Insubmittable, include that explanation, because that'll be a fun feature that Katie gets to read as she's reading the submissions too. We'll talk about that a little bit on the prompt lines next week. And next week's guest is going to be Chris Anderson. Now, Chris Anderson, one of my favorite poets, he's a Catholic deacon who was in our Poets of Faith issue. He was the main interview in that issue. But he's always been one of my favorite poets. He has this great style of poetry where he lets himself really leap, speaking of leaps. So I think I brought up one of his poems not too long ago on Critique of the Week when we were talking about like how you should try to jump somewhere, because he does these big jumps in shorter, more detailed poems that really make the poems come to life. He also, as a Catholic deacon, has a newsletter, which is like his homilies that he does every week, but they include poetry almost every week. And so he's a real example of how you can put poetry out into the regular world, not just poets, but everybody who goes to his parish. Is that what you call him? Whoever goes to his church, experiences poetry contemporary modern poetry every week because he shares poems in church as part of his homily. So that's Chris Anderson. His new book that just came out is Love Calls Us Here. And I haven't read it yet, but I'm really looking forward to it because all of his work is great. And it's going to be a wonderful book, I'm sure. That's Chris Anderson, Rattlecast 258, back to the regular time, Sunday, August 18th at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. So stay up late with us again as Rattlecast 258 with Chris Anderson and your poems about your least favorite words. Looking forward to that. Hope you have a great week, and we will talk to you later. Goodbye.